All right, great.
That's okay. Well,
Cool.
I'm recording this, and that doesn't mean we'll share it. That means I can send it to you. If you don't want me to record it, that's fine too. It's completely up to you.
Oh yeah, that's great. I have no problem with it.
Okay.
That's what got us here. I'm a big fan of your channel, so
Well, thanks, Jeremy.
it would be a little hypocritical of me to not allow you to record it. So.
Well, I only about half the conversations I have actually wind up getting shared, so it's not unusual.
Understandable.
It's not unusual.
Well, we had a conversation.
Yeah, we did have a conversation, and I'm trying to I'm sort of remembering it. How long ago was it? Was it a couple months ago?
Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 months ago, at least. So you've had a lot of conversations between then and now. And being a pastor, that's what you do. You have conversations. Yeah. Well, so I imagine it's easy to forget. But I was kind of having a bit of a crisis at the time, an identity crisis would be the best way to put it, because I grew up Mormon and I had run into the literal, and real. What is real? What is literal? And you and I had a pretty good talk about it. And since then, I've spent a lot more time with Jonathan Pageau and with his brother's book, The Language of Creation, and learning about, the noetic, and learning about the things that that are still part of human experience that can't be measured or touched or and reasoned about this in the same way, using the same tools. And so I feel much better now. I feel a lot more comfortable with the mysterious and with the ineffable.
What was causing you dissonance? I mean, now that you're sort of past it.
Yeah. Well, so I guess what happened was, even though I grew up LDS, I grew up Mormon, they still make a lot of materialistic truth claims.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is like North America is where this book was written, and Jesus visited here, and the Book of Mormon is written. It even says in the introduction, this is a literal history of the people who lived in North and South America who were descendants of Israelites. Right. I mean, it uses the word literal.
Yeah. Well, it developed at the height of that philosophical moment. And so,
yes. So that materialism had been handed to me, and they claim that the Garden of Eden was in Missouri,
Hang on, I've got a Mormon at my door.
Okay.
I'll be back. I'll just pause that.
So I know. Yeah, I know. It's challenging. It's challenging. No, it's a different, it's really fascinating, because your role as a pastor has you sitting with, and especially now with your channel, sitting with these very high level abstract thinkers, and yet your religion is boiled down to its essence every time someone knocks on the door.
That's true. That's very true.
That's really interesting. That's an interesting position you put yourself in,
Well, and I don't know how much I thought about it. I sort of, I was a missionary for a while, and then came back to North America and started doing this, and felt a lot like my father. And the older I get, the more I feel like him. So
yeah, well.
the more I look like him.
That happens to all of us.
It does. So I'm sorry for the interruption. So go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, so I was just saying the hard part was I was handed materialism and religion were kind of married for me.
Yeah.
I kind of grew up in a fundamentalist kind of environment, not just like at my mom's house, they were Mormon, and then my dad's house, they were Baptist. So I had, and they were like the fundamentalist creationists, who, the earth was formed in 6 days because that's what the Bible says, and the earth is 6,000 years old because that's what the Bible says. And I was handed this materialism, and that was the package of religion. And that's actually what drove me away from it when I was about 25, was that, I grew up, interested in science and engineering and physics, and you get exposed to these things and you learn about fossils and about the ways that they date fossils, and you go, well, that's all out the window. I can't, So for me, religion went out the window. I threw the baby out with the bathwater. I threw religion out with materialism because to me, they were part of the same package. And when I got introduced to Jordan Peterson and he started talking about the Bible in a way I'd never heard anyone talk about it before, especially from an academic point of view. You know, okay, yeah, this theology professor talks about it that way, but this guy's a clinical psychologist saying, hey, there's something here that's pretty relevant and useful and psychologically significant. Let's look at it. Let's not just throw it out because it's old. Maybe it has some value because it's old. And that opened my mind to the possibility that someone who's obviously well read and well and articulate and capable of very deep and difficult thought is paying a lot of, is giving, you know, 2-hour-long lectures on one chapter of the Bible. Maybe I should sit down and look at it again. And once I had that viewpoint, it really opened the door. And then Jonathan Pajot and, you know, the meaning of Kek with Kekistan and that whole thing. I was involved with that just through some of my political interests. And it was kind of fun that way. And so when I ran into that and thinking of this liminal character and learning about that and learning about things that don't fit in categories well, I've always considered myself as a person who didn't fit in any kind of category well. And once I started learning about symbolism, all this stuff started making sense. All this stuff starts falling in line, and learning about hierarchies and learning about value structures. And it's just like, oh, okay. The religion is not just like fairy tales for children. It's not just like the Tooth Fairy story. There's meaning here that gives structure to an infinite reality, and it allows you to cope with it and deal with it in a way that that's manageable, you know, and it gives you rules of thumb for dealing with this complexity, and it gives you a framework for looking at this complexity and organizing it. And once I started seeing religion and especially symbolic language that way, it changed everything. It was like, and I think part of the identity crisis as well was I had identified as an atheist for so long to my friends and family that now I'm starting to look at religion again. There's a little bit of a loss of faith there, you know. I mean, my brother's a hardcore nihilist / hedonist, and it has everything to do with conversations we had when we were younger. You know, he told me out as much.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, you're both growing up in the same household.
Yeah.
And wow.
Yeah. And you know, because I'm 10 years older than him.
Okay.
And so he looked up to me kind of as a mentor.
So you had a role to play in that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And so now I have like this role of, hey, guess what? Maybe I was an idiot, you know. And there's that, confronting that too has been very difficult for me to humble myself enough to say, you know, I may have been wrong about something really, really, like the most important thing to be wrong about.
Wow.
I might have been wrong about that.
Wow.
So. Wow,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
You've been on quite a journey.
Yeah, well, and we didn't mention like Scientology, but that was
but that fits in.
Yeah.
That fits into the whole picture.
Yeah. I went through Scientology right after I left religion. It's kind of what led me to leaving my Mormon faith.
Yeah.
But it was a brief foray before I saw through their little tricks. I saw their hand waving, and I was like, no.
Yeah.
You guys are doing this. I've seen this move before.
and it's not terribly veiled.
No. You ask, you know, they say, oh yeah, always go to the source. Okay, what's the source? L. Ron Hubbard says, and I'm like, well, can I see the records of his experiments? Can I read those? Well, see. Thing about that is and you know, that's literally the conversation I had, and that was like my last week in Scientology. I'm like, oh.
You were wise to get out.
Yeah, no, it's an expensive habit. Yeah, so.
It's a reason stars do it. They're the only ones that can really afford it.
Yeah, that's no joke. Yeah,
it's a hierarchy. It's very much a hierarchy.
Yeah, well, and it's the psychological. They really latched on the idea that the more you pay for something, the more you value it. So let's charge them more.
Yeah.
They kind of use that hook, to really kind of take people up. They're selling you ecstasy, not the drug, but an ecstatic experience.
Yeah.
And they just keep giving you a taste, and they keep saying, well, but if this was good, right? Well, if you pay 10 times what you just paid for that, you're going to get 10 times the ecstatic experience from this. Just wait. And they just do that and ad infinitum. It's crazy. Yeah, it's dirty. It's dirty.
It's a dirty business.
It is. Yeah, it is.
So where are you at now? So what do things look like for you now?
Well, so I'm going to my local Orthodox church. I don't attend every Sunday. My daughter, again, some of the damage I've caused is my daughter's like, hey, you've been telling me religion was nonsense for my whole life. She's 13, and she's going, what is this? What are you talking about now? So I have some work to do there as far as trying to explain this new way of looking at things. And I think some of it is just the experience of having her there with me and feeling what we feel while we're there. I mean, that's the benefit of church, is that it's not just, let me tell you something. It's, hey, come feel this with me and see what you think.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the conversation I did with Eric Dirksen, the church planter from Davis.
No.
But the line in that conversation that really stuck out to me was, he said, it used to be that when someone would start coming around, that's kind of, someone begins interested in church, I'd want to give them the right book. And now I just want to tell them, just keep coming to church.
Yes.
Because it's something that has to be embodied, and it's the community, and it's all of that. And when Eric said that, I thought, yeah, that's really right. That's really right.
Yeah.
And it's really this transformation from this very, and again, I want to be careful with this, because this propositional only way of knowing, or merely propositional, to a much more full-bodied, which is how life is, obviously.
Yes. I heard a good analogy. It's like learning martial arts by reading a book about martial arts.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't learn how to fight somebody by reading a book. That's insane, right? That's just, so much of the knowledge of martial arts is handed to you by a master correcting you in the moment.
Yeah.
And by adjusting a little bit and letting you feel what it's like to receive it, and then you go, oh, whoa, that's very different than what I was doing. And so much of that you can't translate into a book. And I feel much more about religion that way now than I did when I was younger. When I was younger, I felt like I had to learn everything about religion, and now I feel like I need to embrace it much more holistically, and think of it more as gardening than as reading, as learning. It's much more like martial arts, and that approach has really changed the way I look at religion, and changed my comfort level with mystery.
Okay.
When I was young, I was like, I have to know all the answers, or I feel really insecure about this. And I read voraciously. My library looked similar to yours in the background there, and yet I was left with these gaping holes in my testimony, because I was too focused on my head and not enough on my heart, and not enough on, because I was so focused on needing all the answers, I didn't feel secure with the mysteries of religion. I didn't, like in martial arts, you see a black belt do something, or they do something to you, and you're like, whoa, what was that? And they know things you don't know.
Yeah. And
it's fine, because in time you'll be a black belt. And I didn't have that kind of patience for religious concepts when I was young. I felt an urgency to know everything mentally, and if I didn't, there was a problem. And that's what created the weakness in my testimony that allowed the pride to enter, you know, and the, oh, well, I don't need these fairy tales for children.
That makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. So what's on your mind? What did you want to talk to me about? Thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to kind of retouch with you and let you know I'm doing better, you know, and I think my whole move now is toward trying to, like, I had some insights when I was young into the two great commandments and how those tie to everything. And that has probably, even though I considered myself an atheist, I still had this like kernel moment where it was the closest experience I've had to pure revelation in my understanding of it, where I was talking with a friend and he was talking about how skyscrapers have a balance between structure and flexibility, right? You know, or like a tree, it has a trunk and it has branches and it has this root structure, and yet it moves in the wind, right? And he was talking to me about that, and I said, out of the blue, and I don't even know why, I just said, that's like pride. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, and it flooded in the idea, you know, because Mormons define pride specifically as like the opposite of love, as enmity. So enmity meaning hatred, hostility, or opposition. That's how Mormons define like scriptural pride, right?
Interesting.
And I was like, yeah. So I was like, that's like, so I said, that's like enmity. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I go, well, if you're not following love God, you have, you know, that like loving God is order. You know, you're moving toward unity and harmony and order.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, that's what we typically think of when we think of sin. We think of, oh, you don't want to be ruled, you don't want order, you just want chaos, and you want disorder, randomness, you know, there's a lot of things that map to this, but I won't get to that yet. But anyway, I just said enmity toward God is the opposite of love of God. So love of God, love your neighbor, is like a balance between a lot of bimodal distribution topics, right? So love God, love your neighbors. So I've loved God. Opposite that is enmity toward God. So I'm against order. I just want to do what I want to do. But then there's the other side that's much more prevalent among religious people, in my experience and in the religious experience, you know, community I was in, and that was love your fellow man, and the opposite of that is enmity toward fellow man. And that manifests as the tyranny of order, right? You get too much structure, too many rules, too much dogma, and now you become incapable of responding to the moment-to-moment challenges that arise in your faith, you know. And I saw this as a missionary, because they have this, you know, they have all the missionary rules, and you get in these certain situations where rules are contradicting each other, and you just see paralysis sets in, and people just don't know what to do. And it's because they're too much order, too much structure. And when you have a balance of structure, meaning the love God, and flexibility, which is love your fellow man, it really, that's what I was talking about, where when someone knocks on your door as a pastor, that's the essence of your religion. You're balancing your love of order with your love of your fellow man. You know, you have the love of order because that's behind you in a bookshelf, but you also have a love of your fellow man, which is someone who needs help, who's at the door, who might be a little dangerous, but you're a man who can take care of himself, right? You've had experience.
I've got stories.
Yeah, you've got experience with vipers, right? You know how to pick up a snake without getting bitten. You know, so no, I think it's a beautiful image of religion and how the role that religion should play in our life. You know, we have our head and we have our heart, and neither of them can rule us. you see people who are ruled by their heart, and they have too much charity, and they give everything away, and they open the door to monsters. And but then you have the people with too much order, and they're too threatened by everyone, and they don't want to be friends with somebody who doesn't believe the same as them, because they might be influenced poorly by them. And you see these two poles, and I really fell into this mindset of balancing those two, and that's kind of what led me into Taoism for a while, and led me into the martial arts, and helped me understand that. And that's really been the undergirding kind of principle of my religion and my life. My life, it was still my religion even when I said I didn't have any, because no one doesn't have religion.
That's right. That's right. That annoys some people to say that, but that's and
but they stand in line for Star Wars tickets, and they say they don't have religion, and you're like, get out of here. They haven't, Jonathan Pajot talked about that with prayer too. It's like people just think, prayer has been kind of like over-defined to only talking with God. And it's like, when you go to your boss and say, hey, I've been doing a great job, I'd like a raise. He's like, that's prayer. And it was like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay. And religion's the same. It's like, hey, you're standing in line for movie tickets to a story that is just flickering lights on a screen. That's religion, kids. That's what it is. It's a story that inspires you to be a better person.
So. Or to shape your life around a certain structure of values.
Yes.
And because you love your children, hopefully to present your children with those values. And people thought religion was just stories about fantastical things. If it were that easy to avoid, it would be a different thing.
Well,
that's very true.
I won't get too detailed, but I will say I've paid huge personal prices for disregarding traditions and for disregarding the wisdom that's encoded in tradition. I'm only now beginning to taste how much I missed out on by taking such a literalist view of scripture and also a dismissive view of values and religious values. And because I've paid a high price for being skeptical of the tradition, of the wisdom that's encoded in tradition and in ritual. There's so many things that are ineffable, that are inarticulable, that have been handed down after many generations of trial and error and experience. And man, I just, nah. I'm fine. I'm smart.
I can figure it out just by looking at it. Oh,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just read a book.
Great.
I'll find an article. I'm sure I can find something on the internet.
That's
There's
right.
a YouTube video about this.
I'm smarter than all those people and thousands of years of, I know.
Yeah, right. I'm smarter than Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and Augustine and St. Thomas Augustine. I mean, anybody you want to mention. It's insane to think that somehow modern man has figured out in 100 years what, our ancestors couldn't figure out in thousands of years. That's the height of pride.
We as a culture have been telling our children this for quite a while, at least since the 60s.
Mm-hmm. The moon. Yeah, the moon landing, right? That was a big, I mean, I wasn't alive for that, but that shaped a generation.
Yeah.
We went to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, your religion's nice. We went to the moon. Yeah. And you're like, okay. Science is great if you want to go to the moon, but it doesn't tell you anything about how to treat your kids.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. And what it did tell you for 40 years destroyed a generation. Yeah. Dr. Spock, there's a whole generation that paid a high price for his book. So
doctors. I haven't heard that name for a long time.
Yeah, there you go. We'll just walk down boomer reminiscent trail here. That's fine.
Yeah.
The moon landing, Dr. Spock, and whatever.
You know. There's a Dr. Spock and a Mr. Spock. So
yes, right. Yeah.
Different folks.
Exactly. I know we're kind of meandering here, but I want you to know that at a time where I was struggling, you helped me calm down and just said, you know, just keep doing what you're doing and everything's going to work out all right. And you're right. It has. And I'm reading the Bible with my wife every morning on our way to work. We commute together. And we're talking about spiritual things and talking about how we can connect better with each other and how we can connect better with our children and help.
What are you learning from the Bible?
Oh man. So we just start, like I was reading the New Testament on my own, just starting at the beginning, but then my wife was reading 12 Rules for Life, so she wanted to start with Genesis. Mm-hmm. So we just dropped into Genesis, and I ran into the idea this morning about Adam. You know, so Adam knew Eve, mm-hmm. and they conceived Seth, mm-hmm. and that. So I looked up the word conceive, and it was really great. It means to receive together, mm-hmm. right? It was like two words: receive mm-hmm. and together, and those. That is what conceive means, and that's a whole different way of looking at knowing, like the word know. Yeah. And you know, Jonathan Peugeot he mentioned this kind of tangentially. He was talking about something else and talked about knowing, you know, being a sexual union and how, you know, and Jordan Peterson talked about that with Cain and how he had welcomed the spirit of sin into his life and basically knew it mm-hmm. in a way, in a sexual union kind of way. He, mm-hmm. you know, and that concept of knowing is very different than the literalist, materialist knowing that I was handed as a young man. Right.
And if you actually, the Hebrew root is yada, and if you actually, again, think about why would the Hebrew Bible use that word for that, you know, way of knowing. And again, it's a full, you know, it's not this psychological, purely immaterial, you know, oh, I know who, I know that. Notice all the little prepositions we put in the middle of know, which distances, but he knew his wife. And I love it. I never, you know, con is, of course, a with preposition.
Yes,
sieve.
Yes.
So you take off the re, you just put sieve and conceive. And no, that's really beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really, so one of the greatest things I've gotten from my scripture study is I found a dictionary online, and it's Webster's Dictionary from 1828.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's really great because it uses biblical references as its like subject matter, you know, as its examples a lot. And what's really nice is that it's much more respectful of the Bible and uses, and the definitions they're closer to what the people who were writing the scriptures meant than what's happened to our English language today. There's a lot of political things. When you start looking at two dictionaries and you start looking at definitions of certain words, and you look at one dictionary from 1828, and you look at another dictionary from 2015, I'm telling you, there's some crazy things that have been happening with how definitions have changed over time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I'll put together some poignant examples and email it to you.
Okay.
Or send it to you on Facebook, because the degradation and just the morphing of language, and some of it I think is intentional, and some of it is just the natural evolution of language. As we get these new, you know, experiences, we have to come up with words for it. Yeah. But it definitely feels like some of it is an intentional agenda that leads to certain words changing meaning.
I hadn't. Yeah, a friend of mine from the from the meetup gave me this book, Crabb's English Synonyms. It's an old edition, and it's a really fascinating book for that
for that very reason, because it's an older book, and you can begin then to track. Okay, this is 1917.
Yes.
But 1826. I mean, culture has been moving quickly for a while now.
Yes.
And so from 1828 to 1928, the world changed dramatically. And from 1928 to 2020, the world has continued to change dramatically.
Yes.
And that's a really interesting practice to take a look and to start playing around with a dictionary from 1828.
Oh, I love it.
Because you can,
great.
One of the things that, I love Ken Burns documentaries, and, I think, one of my favorites is his documentary on the Civil War. And within that documentary, there are, you listen to a number of just letters from one person to another, and you listen to the speech in those letters, and it's just amazing the capacity for language of these ordinary people and the care with which they used the language. And, if we were to compare letters from Civil War soldiers home to letters, if they're even writing, troops in Afghanistan or Iraq to home, just in terms of the use of language, you just wonder, are these people coming from the same place?
Yeah.
But the withdrawal in many ways, the Bible was had such a deep impact in Western civilization.
Yes.
And I even remember people from my youth who were, old when I was in my 20s, let's say, and had grown up, let's say, with the King James Version of the Bible. Very interesting how they worked with language compared to, right now, language is just, it, like everything else, seems to just be on a rocket sled, that it's changing so quickly. Technology is, memes and tweets, and it just whoosh.
Yeah. And things that it's very faddish now.
Yeah.
There's very little respect for language now.
Yeah.
And the fun thing, okay, so like that word conceive, looking that up, I was like, oh, I'm curious about conceive. And I look up that word, and you see that, and it's like, there's so much meaning encapsulated in one word.
Yeah.
That's all gone.
Yeah.
I was reading the example, I kind of ran into a little thread, and it was the difference between joy and gaiety and happiness. And those are three hugely distinct things in traditional language. Joy and happiness and gaiety, those are like, they're on a spectrum, but they're vastly different, with clear demarcations between them if you're reading an 1828 dictionary.
Yes.
And if you're reading in today's dictionary, they're all synonyms. They're just joy, happiness. Yeah, we're meant to be happy. That's not what the scripture's saying, kids.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Well, and the fact that there's a range of identifiable ways of being in those three words that are importantly distinct.
Mm-hmm.
And those distinctions are lost in the rush to have. And I think about, and you see this often, the word, vexed. There's frustrated and there's vexed. And vexed is, this frustrated anger. So it's not just frustration, it's anger. But so people say, well, I'm frustrated. Well, you're really vexed. And if we can use the right word, we can actually see a lot more of ourselves, a lot more of the situation. It's that power of language which is rapidly lost.
My grandmother had that's funny you bring up that word. My grandmother had a really funny combination of words that she would say. She would say frustrated.
Yeah, yeah.
And I loved that. It was like so poetic. It's so perfect.
Yeah.
You capture these two, similar feelings that are often related but not the same.
Yeah.
I was flustered and frustrated. I'm frustrated. She would say that a lot. Ooh, I'm so frustrated. It's great. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There's distinctions that used to be made in the language that have been mashed together into synonyms now, and we've lost the distinction, and in going back to the scriptures now, and I'm reading the Orthodox Study Bible, but I grew up with the King James Version, and I frequently flip back and forth. I frequently have them both open because I can't get past the language of the King James Version as far as how beautiful it is and how expressive it is, and it is a lost art to be able to speak that way. I was reading, I bought this little book of prayers on Amazon Kindle for $1, and someone had written some prayers and they used the thee, thou, thy language, but they screwed it up all over the place. And it's funny because I can't even really articulate, they would use thee instead of thou, or they would use thee instead of thine. And, and you're just like, after having read the King James Version my whole life growing up, now to hear somebody misuse it, it's grating, because it has so much potential for beauty, and it's misused in such a ham-fisted way. It's really hard to be patient with.
Well, it's so funny because so thee, thou, these were, if you know anything about those, these were the informal. People learn Spanish, they learned, the formal, and of course, as an English learner, you learn this, you get two different words and you don't know quite how to use it because you haven't grown up, it hasn't been embodied. But that was, of course, the informal. But then it passes out of the vernacular and just remains in the church. So then people just start to associate it. No, that's how we talk to God. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. So then they try to reapply it, and it's like, wow, okay.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. Well, I don't have a problem with a sacred language space as opposed to a secular language space. I don't have a problem with that. It does help, it's kind of like dressing up for church on Sunday. It puts you into a different mentality where you're showing a little more respect for what is in front of you.
Right.
And I think there's something to be said for that language as well. But when it's not used properly, then you might as well not even try. If you're not going to take the time to learn how to do it the way it was structured, forget it. Let it go.
Yeah. No, it's very true. It's very true.
Shall and will. That's another interesting.
Yeah.
Those two have matched together. Shall is all the dead, and those used to be two different things.
Yeah.
So,
anyway. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. Well, and I'm dealing. So my sermon last week was on the Beatitudes, and it's interesting what has happened in our culture to a beatitude. You find them in the Psalms, and then you find them, of course, at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And then we have, of course, via the African American tradition, this blessed. If you're part of it, how are you today? And if you're a Christian, you're talking to another Christian. Well, I'm blessed. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, there's lots of layers to that in the Black community. And then, of course, via Instagram, you have this hashtag blessed thing going. And so then you come all the way back to something like, what are these Beatitudes in the Psalms? And then why does the Sermon on the Mount start with these rather crazy Beatitudes where Jesus is talking about people that by any measure of happy society are certainly not blessed? And it's just well, as pastors, pastors have to deal with words because it's so much of our vocation.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they are windows into universes of understanding
Yeah.
that have largely been lost because the Bible, like I said, in Webster's dictionary, when you look at examples from usage, the usage examples, they're all from the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like the Bible was, this is how language is used, people. This is the English language.
Yeah.
Get with it. And I think that ties back into what you were saying with the Civil War, with people were they were infused with the language of the Bible, and these understandings, they didn't have to sit on YouTube for 2 hours and talk about what words meant, because they all understood, because they all were reading the same book. Right. And we just don't have that anymore. We don't have this unifying structure. And I think that's why we're starting to splinter at the seams. That's why things are falling apart, because there's no, we don't have that lodgepole holding up Western society anymore.
Yeah. And the
you
way
and John Vervaeke were talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really excellent point. How the English Bible created, in many ways created the West, and at least the English speaking world.
Yes.
And just as you noted with, Adam knew his wife and conceived, and these things, and what was carried through them was, of course, also the Greek and the Hebrew, because embedded in, so now if, like me, when you're working on a passage for a sermon, you take apart the passage in terms of the original languages, you do a little bit of study in terms of, okay, these are some of the ways that this has been rendered, and then on that goes. The Hebrew and the Greek got carried along through it to the culture.
Yes.
In ways that in ways that are, again, not immediately obvious to any of us simply using it. And throw that into the blender that has been the world since, in the description of Thomas Mann in his book 1483, the Columbian Exchange, because globalization really began with Columbus, and via Columbus, now suddenly the entire globe is one community, one network of communities as such, and that has only becoming more so. And we're watching it with this coronavirus in China, and it just makes us realize, okay, so now who in the United States has this coronavirus? Well, these people do, because they were just in China. And you begin to realize how many people are going between China and the United States on any given day. And it's one global world.
Yes.
Well,
crazy. and what's funny about that is that I grew up, I was born in 76, and so I'm in my 40s, and things were still pretty demarcated at that point. Things were, travel wasn't, when I was a kid, like, I could go anywhere in my neighborhood on a bike. That's what we did. We didn't have cable. We rode our bikes all day, every day. But there were limits, it was like, stay in the city limits. That was my boundary. Yep. And there was clear, the boundaries were clear. Well, now, because of the internet, we've lost, largely, a lot of accents have died, a lot of dialects have died, languages are dying. Everyone speaks English. Like, traditional costumes have died, traditional dances have died. It's like so many things that used to make people different have been just pushed out of the way. And we focus on all these things, how we're the same, and it's great. We get along better, and people from different countries can get on the same airplane and not kill each other. But it's at a price. It's not. There's benefits, and it's always a trade-off with technology. It's always a two-edged sword. You become more capable and more dependent, and with this boundaries, we can interact with people from other cultures and countries more easily without coming to blows. However, we also lose some of the things that make us unique. We lose some of the things that made us special and made us interesting, you know, because
well, and it's so ironic in a culture that claims diversity as its highest value, that the holding of this value is actually responsible for the destruction of a good bit of diversity.
Yes. Yes. It's enforced diversity that makes us homogenous.
Right. And that's so telling of human intentionality. You know, I often hear people, again, you know, lauding the value of intentionality. And I think intentionality is a wonderful value. But once you begin to understand that intentionality is a governing and a colonizing and a mastering of a particular thing, you have now excluded the other things, often unintentionally. In other words, with all intentionality, there's always the unintentional that has to come with it.
Yes.
And so the more intentional you become, the more exclusive you become and blind you become to these unintentionalities. And then usually we're filled with our own sense of pride and self-righteousness and accomplishment over with being completely unaware of what we've done.
Yes.
So human.
Yeah. No, that's a really beautiful way of putting it, because, you know, you can see examples of that all over the place, of people being governed by intention rather than outcome, you know, by consequence. It's like they don't want to consider consequences. We just want to make sure we're doing the right thing, you know, and it's like, well, they're kind of related, you know. It's like, if you intend to make a peanut butter sandwich, but you don't use peanut butter, it's not a sandwich. It's like, I'm sorry. It's just your intentions only get you so far. You know, if you don't also consider the consequences. They're married together. It's like, in the world, I work in custom fabrication. We custom fabricate metal. And you live in a world of drawings and raw materials. And your drawings are your intentions. And the drawings are beautiful and perfect. And then you're faced with this pile of raw materials that you need to translate into a close approximation of the drawing. And drawings have tolerances that acknowledge the fact that your building materials are never going to be this perfect drawing.
That's right.
They're somewhere in between. And you know, I mean, it's encapsulated in sacrament, in the Eucharist with bread. Bread is, you take an idea and you take some raw material and you add some heat and some time, and now we have this magical thing that's very different than the idea or the raw materials. And you know, that's what I'm confronted with in building. We're building something that's unlike the drawings and very unlike the raw materials. And that's where we live.
Yeah.
And right now we've got a lot of focus on moving toward, all that matters is how good the drawing is. And we can build it out of whatever junk we want, and whatever comes out doesn't matter because my drawing was perfect.
That's really good. That's true.
And that's tying to your intentionality, right? My intentionality, I put a lot of time into making these drawings perfect, right? That's all that matters. Here you go, world. Here's my drawing. And it's like, well, you know what?
You can't live in your drawing.
No,
you can't.
Yes.
You know, you can't.
Perfect.
You can't, you know, a cherry picker to pull an engine out of a car. You can't pull an engine out of a car with your drawing. You can't, you know, you can't hold back. You can't direct a river with your drawing. And no, that's very, very true.
Yeah, well, it is the loss of the craftsman mentality. You know, we've gone to, you know, the engineer used to mean a mechanic. Now an engineer means a kid who draws things. who went to school and can do some math on it.
Yep. Yep.
It's like so abstract that now you get engineers who draw things that can't be built.
Yeah.
They hand it to a machinist, and the machinist goes, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And the engineer's like, what are you talking about? I drew it. This happens daily.
I completely believe it. I completely believe it. I worked for one summer during college, I worked in a machine shop, and you know, that was before, I mean, we had just gotten a CNC machine into the shop, and of course the machinists were like, you know, oh.
Yeah, right.
The rest of us were on drill press and lathes, but no, that's right. You know, pretty paper, but can't turn it into flesh here, buddy.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll just be an idea.
And that goes back to where we very first started with the two, you know, love God, love your neighbor. Those come together into your life.
Yeah, that's right.
Love God is the drawing, and your neighbor is the raw materials, and your job is to meet them in the middle.
Yeah.
And just do the best you can.
Yeah.
You know, and I have a lot more respect for that view of religion than I did when I was young. I didn't understand what religion was when I was a kid.
Well, how could you? You know, you were a kid.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
you know?
No, it's true.
So praise God for where He's brought you so far.
Indeed, indeed. I feel very blessed. You know, back to that word, but I feel very fortunate that.
What's the right word?
I feel
blessed is the right word.
Yeah, I feel God's mercy poured out on me in spite of my pride and in spite of the wandering that I've done over the last 20 years of my life. And I'm grateful that I'm getting a second chance to live my life in a way more aligned with reality.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Jeremy. I got to move.
I understand.
Guy. They're having a party outside my door. I can smell it.
Okay. Well, bless you, and God bless you for living your religion.
Well, thank you.
And helping people who knock on your door, because that's not always easy. So
it's a lot easier. They're a lot easier to deal with in the abstract.
Yes. I understand. Yeah, it's easy to say, right? It's easy to have intentionality about working with people like that. It's much different to work with people like that. I understand.
They're not too bad. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it.
Well,
thank you, Jeremy.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, see ya.